Right. So Mary, you can start. Yeah, good.
So, yeah, it's 11 o'clock, so shall we start?
Yes.
So my topic is sexuality and creativity. And I want to carry on from where Anne left off with this symbol of the living being. And explain that we have an I, the I as in I am, not the physical I, it's the letter I, which is the core of our being. It's this that creates and experiences life. In order to do so, it has to have an ability to create and experience of life. And that's in this section, which Martinus calls X2. It's dominated by something he calls the mother energy, this violet energy, which subdivides into these basic energies: instinct, gravity, feeling, intelligence, intuition, and memory. And below that, we have the physical organism and the consciousness, which again is made up of these 6 basic energies. And the orange circle shows us that we are here looking at a being in the animal kingdom, that is to say, a real animal or an unfinished human being. And as Anne said, Martinus talks about the 2 sexual poles in our consciousness as being placed here, somewhere here in X2, in the mother energy. And they're like 2 general talent kernels that can sort of subdivide into all these other energies. So when a being wants to create something, what happens is that the I, through its ability to create and experience, creates something in the physical world or in the spiritual world. It can be a thought. And then how does one experience something? Well, it goes the other way, that something from the physical world is received through our ability to express, experience, and create, and reaches our I. And Martinus, I've made a sort of sketch of this. So when we experience something, we get an impression. Like at the moment, I'm getting an impression on my computer screen. I'm looking at my computer. I'm seeing that. And that impression goes through my ability to create and experience to reach my I. And there it is developed and transformed, and it turns into some kind of expression. So impression turns into expression. And this is the whole process of experience in life. It's also the artistic process. So this is a cycle of impressions and expressions constantly in and out, from the I into the physical and spiritual worlds, and from the physical and spiritual worlds back to the I via this X2, which facilitates this interaction. And Martinus describes this process as the turning of the energies, like the I, as in the title here, the I sends out the energies and they come back and they're turned around and sent out again. And Martinus describes this as the basis of the sexual principle. It's in essence a sexual principle of giving and taking, giving and receiving. And he likens it to the biological process where sperm is injected in the woman. And if things work out, then an embryo is created. And after 9 months, a child is born. The child then grows up. If it's a male child, then the child will produce more sperm, which can produce an embryo, which can produce a new child and so on. And if it's a woman, then she can produce an egg instead of sperm and so on. So we have this sexual cycle here, an ongoing sexual process. So he says that conception, pregnancy, and birth are 3 stages in every single creation. So they're not just biological processes to do with the creation of new human beings or new animals. You can conceive an idea. You can be pregnant with ideas. At least in English, you can be pregnant with ideas. And yeah, if you've ever had a book published, I've had some translations published and so on. It feels like a kind of a birth. I mean, it's not the painful childbirth that women go through, but it feels like a kind of birth. And then you get a new idea. Yeah, what shall I do now? You get a new idea, and you become pregnant with that idea, and you work on it and work on it and work on it. And at some point, you give birth to some sort of new creation. So this biological sexual process can be likened to all these general ways of creating experiences for one another in life in general. So Martinus says here in Leavitt's book, volume 3, everyone fertilizes everyone else, just as everyone is impregnated by everyone else. We are, in fact, intimately and sexually connected to the whole world. In the absolute sense, the experience of life is a sexual release. Now that can maybe sound a little provocative, but it means that if I give you an idea, I'm sort of fertilizing you. I'm fertilizing your consciousness, impregnating you with a new idea. And the same goes the other way, that I can be impregnated by other people's ideas. So in principle, it's the same thing. And here we have another quote from Leavitt's book 3. He says, with these two poles, these two sexual poles, the male and the female pole, we have arrived at the innermost core of all life and all consciousness. All matter, substances, energies, forces, mental and physical functions are rooted in these two poles. All other forms of talents in a living being are subdivisions of these two great general talents. No manifestation, no form of revelation of life whatsoever can exist without being an effect, a rhythm, or nuance in the particular mode of operation or interaction of these two poles. We can trace this interaction in every manifestation. So as Anne said, the sexual principle is something much, much larger than we normally imagine it to be. And one of the things we see with this pole development, this polar transformation, is the evolution of art. He says here in the Eternal World Picture, Volume 3, that as the poles evolved, a tendency to create began to emerge in the beings, a kind of expression for the ideals that were perceived and worshipped as the highest ones at that particular step in evolution. So art emerges at a certain point in our evolution. And at the beginning, it's what Martinus calls animal art, and it will become real human art. And this is what we see in this symbol here. We see many, many details here, and I won't go through all of them, but we can start, I take it in general, we can say that the symbol is to be read from the bottom up. It's called Animal and Human Thought Climates. And here on the left, where you see my little red cursor, you see the animal kingdom proper up to this thick violet line. And then we see in this part, which is orange and yellow, we see the zone of terrestrial human beings. In other words, we're what Martinus calls unfinished human beings. And that we are on this step, and there are very few on the next step, he says. And we see that this yellow area is growing in us. This is our humane ability, our ability to feel empathy and sympathy for others, our ability to love our neighbor as ourselves. And we can see that this grows and grows and grows until it becomes 100%. And when we get to that point, then we become a totally new kind of being. We become this double-poled being with the two sexual poles in balance. And an example of a being like this is, for example, Christ. So then we enter the physical part of the real human kingdom, and then later on we go into the spiritual realms. We go to the other side of the symbol, this violet column. we can see that this is only possible, this sexual evolution is only possible through the principle of reincarnation. There's no way one could evolve sexually if one only had one life, or evolve in any way, really. So we see these little violet squares, life after life after life after life after life. But we see what is constant throughout these lives is the I, this sense of this core of our being. This is constant. But we experience very, very many different things throughout these lives. And then if we go to this part, we see here a male being with a dominating male pole, the green color. And we see a latent feminine pole here. At this thick line, we're at this the sort of culmination of masculinity and femininity. We've got, this is at the stage where the first human beings began to appear on Earth. So up to this point, we've had beasts of prey and so on. And I don't think I can think of any more masculine than a male lion, or more feminine than a female lion, or something like that. But then we begin to stand up on two legs and move around in another way. So here we have the almost 100% male being and almost 100% female being. And I say almost because the opposite pole can never completely disappear. So we have a tiny masculine pole in the so-called primitive woman, and the tiny feminine pole in the so-called primitive man. This opposite pole grows and grows and grows. And as I said before, we are at this stage and this stage, and very few are just a little bit further on. We can see that this feminine pole is growing very significantly in the man, just as the male pole is growing very significantly in the woman. And since we are around here in evolution, we are in the middle of this transition. And this is what causes a lot of confusion, a lot of pain and suffering. And we don't really know what's happening. Martinus explains, however, that this opposite pole in our consciousness is growing and growing and growing, and will continue to grow until it reaches a balance with our primary pole. So here we see the male and the female pole are in balance in the man, and the female and the male pole are in balance in the woman. So at this stage, when we get this total balance, we become a Christ being, or a cosmically conscious being, which is symbolized by this star over here. So we cross this thick line, so to speak, from being cosmically unconscious to becoming cosmically conscious. This means that we have direct, personal, intimate, complete knowledge of the solution to the mystery of life. So wherever we look in life, whatever questions we have the answers within ourselves. We become our own source. And this is due to this pole structure. So one can say that the one pole structure is a structure that guarantees that our ability to love is limited, and that creates the darkness that we experience. At the same time, the sexual experience, which I guess is the flame he shows here, he doesn't explain it, but anyway, he does say in the text that the sexual experience that we have as animals is the light and the darkness. It is this unconscious experience of God that keeps us going through the darkness. So actually, when you think about how we treat animals today, and we artificially inseminate them and keep them in captivity, then we're actually doing very serious damage to the animal's sexual structure. I mean, that's not something one normally talks about, but we're really ruining them. And Martinus said too that if you artificially inseminate long enough, then the animals will lose their ability to be fertile. So we're going towards this balanced state. Now there are lots of things happen on the way. I won't go through all the details in this symbol, just to say this is the killing principle and the thoughts behind the killing principle. And this is arrogance and ambition. This is a rather important one, because we can see that when arrogance and ambition taper out, then we can see that the great birth starts. That's this process. And this is a process whereby we get momentary glimpses. He calls them cosmic glimpses of the absolute truth. So we don't have it as a permanent state, but when we're morally in balance, when we've subdued or suppressed our arrogance and ambition sufficiently, we can open up for some kind of experience of the loss of life. So one can perhaps experience that, yeah, God does exist, or reincarnation is a fact, or the law of karma exists or something. And these experiences become more and more frequent until one reaches cosmic consciousness as a permanent condition. And this symbol has to do with all the pain and suffering that we experience in this transition, this sexual transition. So he calls it the birth pangs of the real human kingdom. And of course, women who are giving birth, they can put up with an enormous amount of pain because they know there's a baby coming out of it. They're looking forward to this baby. And once the baby's born, I mean, I was present at 2 births, and I remember the mother saying after a birth that took, was it 19, 20 hours or something, and an awful lot of pain and suffering. As soon as the baby was born, she said, "Oh, I could do it all again," because it was so worth it. So if we know where we're going with this sexual evolution, it makes it easier to bear. And some of the sufferings involved here, it could be loneliness, it could be unhappy marriages, it could be all the financial difficulties associated with bringing up a family. It could be persecution as a homosexual or as bisexual. It could be total confusion. It could be being misused, sexually abused as a child, and so on. So there are all sorts of troubles here, divorces, yeah. But they do taper away, and they taper away the more humane one becomes. And this part of the symbol is neighborly love. So we see that through this part of the animal kingdom that we belong to, neighborly love is growing and growing and growing. And here it is 100%, even though the figure seems to continue growing. So at this point, I'll skip the next figure. I'll go to this one. No, it's this one. Yes, sorry, this bluish one. This is art, and we can see that art arises when we cross from being 100% animals to becoming partly human, and we get all sorts of primitive forms of art. And art, Martinus says, reflects the ideals that we have at any point in our existence. And art changes. So he describes 2 kinds of art. There's animal art and real human art. And I'll come to that. So here are some examples of what he calls animal art. And that's where one worships the killing principle as part of entertainment or artistic productions. So here we see a gladiator who's stuck various, I don't know what you call those things, into the bull. The bull is bleeding and so on, and there are probably thousands of people cheering. So here one is using the killing principle as a kind of entertainment. Here you see a battle scene. Often if you visit old castles and so on, they're full of paintings like this that sort of celebrate chopping people's heads off and killing both the other soldiers and their horses and so on. And then here we have 2 women boxing. This has nothing to do with neighborly love as far as I can see, but it's a kind of, it's elevating a kind of reduced principle of killing. Of course, you don't kill your partner here, but you can damage them. One is elevating that kind of entertainment. So here Martinus says, the breaking of the 5th commandment, which is thou shalt not kill, has here been turned into popular entertainment. He calls these things half-finished art. And in this connection, he also mentions things like films and books where the story ends with the criminal getting his punishment and the hero getting the beautiful girl, and everybody lives happily ever after, except the poor criminal who's in prison. But Martinus describes that as unfinished or half-finished art, because the story isn't really finished until the enemies meet and can really embrace one another in total forgiveness and total understanding. So art of the future, I say the future but there are some examples of it already, but art of the future will not leave the story unfinished in that way. Yeah. He says this animal art, I should say, will be replaced with a D. This animal art will be replaced by art that will pay homage to and praise absolute universal love, or the very highest divine, very highest principle, divine foundation of life. It will praise God and the human being in God's image after his likeness, who has arisen from darkness. So there's an Icelandic artist who I like very much called Einar Jónsson, and he was friends with Martinus. Martinus visited his gallery in Reykjavik in Iceland, which I would really recommend. And Martinus wrote about Einar Jónsson's works of art, and he spoke very much that they reflected the victory of light over darkness. And they reflected eternal realities. And I can't show you very many of his pictures because of copyright, but anyway, they reflect something higher than this animal art. It's real human art. Of course, it's not the only example. So we have Martinus divides human beings into many categories in various places in his books, and he does so not in order to sort of put us in boxes, but to help us understand ourselves and where we are now, where we've come from, and where we're going. And in Liebes Book 3, he divides us into two main types. He talks about us being creative types and reproductive types. The creative types, they're those who live 100% for their art or their science or politics or engineering or whatever it is. That's their whole life. That's where all their passion and energy lies. And for people in this category, having a baby could be a catastrophe. And I can mention an example of someone I know, a very great Danish artist who got pregnant when she was young, and she thought this is a total catastrophe. And so she decided that she would have her baby adopted at birth because she was so intent on becoming an artist. And this is what happened, and it all worked out very happily, both for the baby and for her and so on. It's not the choice that everyone would make, but the trouble is that even though you're 100% a creative type, you still have your animal organism with its needs. So accidents like that can happen. Anyway, that's one type. Then there's the reproductive type, and that's the type whose whole interest, their entire focus is on having a partner and having children and making a home, and anything outside of that sphere is totally without interest. But I don't think there are that many people of that type around anymore, at least not in this part of the world. Most of us are in this transitional state. I can just say, for the sake of completeness, that there are some who neither have children nor create anything. And that's people like beggars and vagabonds and people who live by cheating others and so on. So, but that's just for the sake of completeness. But let's look at these transitional types, because that's where most of us are. Because most people still want to have families. They maybe want a partner, they want children. Not everybody, but certainly a lot. But they're also interested in becoming a good musician, or writing a book, or studying cosmology, or getting involved in politics, or going out and working for Red Cross or whatever. So here people can experience a conflict, and I can explain that with another example. I had a friend who wanted to interview me for a thesis she was doing. It was something to do with my area of work, so she wanted to interview me, and we agreed to meet. And she spent the first 15 minutes of our meeting crying, and that was because in order to finish her thesis, she had to leave her 1-year-old in childcare for 8-9 hours a day. Her husband was also a creative type, and he spent all his day practicing, so on. So she was in this dilemma: shall I look after my baby or shall I finish my thesis? And I think it's not to point to her in particular, but I think a lot of people experience this conflict. Like there's some things they really want to achieve in life, but having children takes a lot of time and energy and money and so on. So you're bound to earn a living, not just for yourself, but to look after your children and so on. So this transitional zone can be quite tricky for a lot of people. And I guess it's particularly tricky for women because I don't know, especially in the early years when the children are small, because they're trying to do everything at once. And a lot of young women today are suffering from stress because they're trying to manage the home life, and at the same time they're trying to advance in their business or get ahead in politics or be a great musician or painter or something. So this is a very understandable phenomenon. But I think if you know what's going on, it can be easier to deal with. So here I have a quote from the Christmas Gospel. Martinus says here, "What is it then that causes a terrestrial human being to be anything more than a mammal? It is all the forms of manifestation that are not necessary for or have anything to do with the maintenance of marriage, reproduction, or act of mating. That is to say, all those manifestations that a person wants with all its heart, not because they're required by the drive for self-preservation or the struggle for daily bread, and not because they may make a lot of money, but only because it is a divine pleasure to concern oneself with special manifestations for their own sake. To create a special, particular type of manifestation or a particular piece of work, simply because there is joy and inspiration in carrying out the act of work, is a completely new mentality." So this is this artistic side that is, and I'm using artistic in a very, very wide sense, a creative side that is growing. And he goes on here. "It is the presence of this mental state that constitutes the beginning symptoms of being a Christ child. These are namely the incipient talents for manifesting the kingdom of heaven. It is the beginning of the world in which there will be no wailing or a gnashing of teeth. It is a nascent foundation for the peace and goodwill of the terrestrial human being the Christmas gospel promises. It is namely the products of this great joy and inspiration that fill, for example, the world's museums or public art collections with the so-called priceless art treasures. Do these great collections of art for the public not contain brilliant manifestations, indeed almost divinely beautiful products from the world's greatest geniuses, released for the viewing, joy, and inspiration of the public or the individual members of the community?" He goes on in this text to compare an art museum like this to a department store where everything is for sale. So we see that there arises in us a new drive for self-preservation. We have the animal drive for self-preservation, which is our purely physical survival. We want to make sure we have enough food, we have shelter, we have food and shelter and clothing and so on for our children, for our old parents and so on. And we also see that at some point in our evolution, the animal way of behaving gives us pangs of conscience. We begin to wake up. We begin to get a humane side. That means that we can't stick a dagger in people the way we used to stick our claws in them as real animals. We begin to get pangs of conscience. And this is also the beginning of a new kind of mentality. And this conscience grows and grows and grows until we don't have the heart to hurt anyone or anything. Parallel with this, we see this need to express oneself artistically. And this artistic expression changes as we evolve morally. So it reflects our new ideals, our new humane ideals. So here I took some examples, and of course there are many other examples that I would love to have taken, but for copyright reasons I can't put them on PowerPoint. But here we have this artist, Einar Jónsson from Iceland, and we see behind him one of his sculptures. We see it's called The Pioneer, and we see that it's a rather poor picture, but we see this man going ahead of the flock and lifting these very, very heavy stones, these basalt stones, and clearing the path for people to follow him. For me, my interpretation, my personal impression of it, and I don't know what he intended with it, is that we have in life, we have elder brothers and sisters that go ahead of us and show us the way. We've had the world religions, we've had Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, we've had all the humane world religions that are showing us the way to go, really. Love thy neighbor as thyself. When someone comes with that commandment, then they're really lifting very large stones for us and saying, well, this is the way to go. It's not an eye for an eye or tooth for tooth like the law of Moses, but it's love thy neighbor as thyself, forgive your enemies, turn the other cheek, and so on. So there are always pioneers that are slightly ahead of us in evolution. It's a kind of divine cosmic parent principle, and the flock can follow. That's just one little example. It happened to be that photo I could find. And here's another one of Einar Jónsson in rather bad quality, but we see death here symbolized as a crucifixion, but we see also a resurrection. And again, my own personal interpretation is that Einar Jónsson here is showing that life continues. You die in the physical body, which is like a cross, but you do resurrect to a new kind of life in the spiritual worlds and a reincarnation and so on. We see here a very ancient work of art, the Sphinx. And again, it's a kind of cosmic analysis because it's a true analysis of our current situation in evolution, where we have a human head, we have some certain human faculties, but we have an animal body. So we're built like a lion, but have a human head. And this is a perfect picture of where we are in evolution, even though this statue is very, very old. And maybe its popularity is due to the fact that it rings very, very true. This is how it is. We are human beings, but we can be very nasty. I mean, we see what's going on in the world with wars and so on. And our human relationships, we can be jealous, we can be aggressive, we can be selfish and so on. And those things are all expressive of the animal within us. But the human in us wants to love and to forgive and to understand and to be empathetic and sympathetic. So for me, this is a perfect work of art, really. And here we have something by William Blake, Jacob's Ladder. I don't know the story about Jacob, but again, my immediate impression is of a spiral cycle of evolution, of going onwards and upwards and upwards and upwards throughout life. So one could find many, many examples of human art. So one could say that we begin to express ourselves artistically when we cross the line from being real animals to being terrestrial human beings. And we find the first cave drawings and so on. And the art expresses our ideals at the time. So we go through very yeah, in a sense, ugly, but they can be beautiful paintings, for example, but they celebrate the principle of killing. And art will evolve and gradually celebrate the principle of neighborly love. Yeah, so I'll stop there and stop sharing. Yeah, I'll come and join you.